name is Jay, and I'm the host of Feel Good Fatherhood, a podcast and a community for fathers just like you. I'm thrilled to introduce today's panel, which is part of Father's Friday Summer Series, and I'm really excited by the topics. As a dad, I'm grateful for Fathering Together, for bringing together these collection of interviews and experts on these particular thoughts and thought leaders, disruptors, etc. We're working together to change our perspective of how dads engage with their families, communities, and workplaces. Today's topic is, I think, so critical to the feeling of isolation that many of us can feel or might feel as we enter this arena of fatherhood. As a practitioner in this space and as a man who interviews many fathers and serves other fathers, I can't underscore the importance of what today's topic is about, which really is about building great communities. This has been critical to me because in my story, I started out just like many of the panelists today, isolated, alone, and one of my crazy stories is one of the times I felt the most alone as a new father was when I brought my young daughter to the playground. Everybody was either on their phone or I was just completely invisible. And it really underscored for me the importance of finding like-minded other fathers, men, and mothers that really supported the role and us engaging with our families and our children. Please tune in. You're going to love it. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Father's Friday panel. I am your moderator and host, Brian Anderson. I am the co-founder of Fathering Together, and I'm joined by some amazing dads from across the country and globe. Actually, we've got some UK representation here today to talk about all the things that come, both the good, the bad, the ugly, in forming dad communities and what dads can gain from being active members in their communities. So throughout this whole summer, you've had some great opportunities already, and there'll be many more ahead in our series that is part of a larger program that we have here at Fathering Together, I should say. So look forward to having you on many other panels and other events that we have going on. But without further ado, let me introduce our amazing leaders here. We've got Dan Flanagan from a UK-based Dad Lost Soul. They do a lot of in-person gatherings over there, playgrounds, schools. Correct me if I'm wrong when we get to it, Dan, but he is also a father of one son and really rocks hats better than the rest of us. So thank you, Dan, for being here. Brian Jackson is from a trio of amazing dads called Dad Genes. They run a podcast, but it really got started with a dad community that Brian started, and he is a father of 3 now, correct? Just 2 kids. As well as an educator and consultant in the DEI formal classroom spaces. So looking forward to gaining some deeper insights from you, Brian, as well. And then we have my co-founder, Chris Lewis from Fathering Together. He is, he's got a kid going off to college soon, so he is entering a new phase of fatherhood. But he and I started Dads with Daughters as a Facebook group many, many years ago. But he's been blogging and talking about fatherhood since long before maybe the rest of us were in diapers, because Chris is one of the OGs in the fatherhood space. So we're going to keep this one more informal and friendly, as you might have already noticed from my intro. But really, as I said, we're going to be talking about dad communities, what it took to create them, sustain them, and the benefits we all get. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Dan to just start our first question. And you started your community way back in 2016. I think it's the oldest out of all the communities we have here on this panel. So just curious, how it got started, what was the birth story of your dad community, and what were some of the highs and lows of getting it off the ground? And if you want to correct anything I said wrong about in the intro.
No. So yeah, Dad Lost Soul is a not-for-profit that I set up in 2016. We exist to orchestrate a revolution in the way that the stories and struggles of the 6 million dads in the UK are seen, heard, and supported. The story of it's go back 40 years. Yeah, my parents divorced, and because of my mum's ill health, my dad was awarded custody of me and my 3 sisters, which was very unusual in the sort of late 70s and early 80s. So I grew up seeing the the abject lack of support that there was for dads. Fast forward 30 years later, I became a dad myself. Had everything that society told me I should have. I was married, had a nice house in the suburbs, good job and stuff like that. But I was really struggling. And I looked for support and there was none. And it's quite lonely. And there's a lot of dad guilt out there that I'm sure all the listeners can, relate to. My role, as I saw it then, was a provider. So it was to go out to work and put food on the table. That meant I was leaving work very early, leaving home very early in the mornings, getting home quite late at night and not really being present. And then it sort of came to, my own dad passed away. And I did a typical bloke thing of not ignoring it, but not talking about it. 6 months down the line, it came and bit me on the backside and I really crumbled. I was looking for support. There wasn't any. So I started blogging. The blog took off quite quickly. Went into like an online magazine. So we had about 18 different dads from around the UK telling stories. Then it turned into a content agency. So we had a lot of brands that wanted to focus on the dad market, but the narrative that you'll be aware was very poor. It was very, very, very unhelpful. And my background was in PR and marketing. So I thought, well, I'm not having this. So I wrote something called the Dadifesto, which is a challenge to the brands to do something better. And we did it ourselves. That's all going seamlessly lovely. But yeah, I was still lonely, and I was going to mother and baby groups and feeling like a bit of an outsider. It wasn't very welcoming, shall we say. And I just got fed up. So one day I just stuck a flag in the ground and put something out on Facebook and said, does anybody want a dad-friendly play date? We had, I think, 14 dads and 20 kids turn up at a friend of mine's office in the city. We went nuts. We had beatbox battles, DJ battles, soft play. But what I realised during that event is that all these men were strangers, but nobody was on their mobile phones. And if you transition that to the normal sort of, when you go to a kid's birthday party or something like that, it's the mums that take over and the dads tend to withdraw and don't want to be there. But because we gently removed mums from it, the dads were taking a lot more sort of an active role in it. That's from there, we've sort of grown now. I think we've got just under 3,000 members, 8 different countries, and we do 3 things. So we do events. So we do dad-friendly play dates. So these are run by the dads for the dads on a Saturday morning with the kids, because you kind of get fed up of going to the park on your own. You get fed up of going to the soft play on your own, surrounded by people looking at your phones. So we partner with a range of different organisations over here. So a tech innovation centre, a centre for adults with learning difficulties. And yeah, we put on kick-ass events, basically. Dads can come and have a coffee, the kids run wild, learn different skills, make those friends that maybe you don't have access to, because, even if you're on the school runs, as a dad, it's quite intimidating because you've got the little mums mafias to deal with. So yeah, our community has grown, and then we do dads only meetups. So the best way to sort of describe that for the listeners is it's a youth club, but it's for men. So rather than saying, hello, middle-aged men, come over here and talk about your feelings, which they won't do. It's like, come over here, listen to some great music, play some games, have some chats. We have stand-up comedians come in, and it's from there, then the men open up. Then we've got our broadcast pillar. So it's lots of blogs, just much like you guys, Facebook communities, radio shows, and then we've got an apparel range that we're going to launch. So we're very fortunate that one of our community is a great designer, and he works with a part of Chuck D's design agency. So he's worked with Wu-Tang, Run DMC and stuff. So he's got some great designs. Kind of, you wear our sweatshirts as a uniform, and that goes to fund a play date for a family that can't afford it. So, yeah, why I started it, that's the reason why. I never even assumed for 1 minute that 6 years later would be my full-time job. It just grew out of me being lonely and a bit embarrassed to admit that I wasn't this great dad that I saw on social media and everybody else. And I was like, I don't understand this, and everything I do, simply, I felt not good enough. But yeah, through the sort of power of having some very open conversations, I realised I wasn't alone. And there's thousands of us out there.
I don't even have I should have started with Brian or Chris. I don't want to have to make them follow up after you, but that's powerful, man. I so appreciate you sharing your story here, everywhere. Because yeah, I think so many more dads have that experience and they don't know how to express it or connect around it. And so to create that opportunity is beyond awesome. So appreciate you being in the space over in the UK. But also, you said you're global. So where are some of those countries?
So we've got Dadless Oldies in New Zealand. We've got Dadless Oldies in the Czech Republic. I'm talking to some guys actually in Atlanta that I need to talk to you about a separate conversation. Germany, France. One actually during lockdown, I think I might mention when we spoke last, we did an international play date during lockdown 1, where that was dads in the States, Kenya, Germany, France, all getting together and actually having an online play date. And that was great because you had a black kid in Chicago talking to a white kid in Scotland about what lockdown was like for them. And these sort of conversations don't happen, and they need to happen.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting leveler, I suppose, lockdown. It was very negative, obviously, for many reasons, but it did force a lot of people into sticking their hand up and going, I'm really struggling, man, and I don't know what to do about it.
Well, I'll turn it over to Brian. I'm just curious, like, you've run this podcast for a while, but you had a community first with Didan, and just curious, like, how they're similar. What similarities did you hear in Dan's story, but differences as well, seeing as you're based in the Baltimore, DC area?
Absolutely. So my sort of iteration of fatherhood started before Didan, and it started the day that my father passed in 2016, because I knew that during that same year I was getting married and we were already talking about kids. So this new chapter started with no ink to paper. And what framed how I looked at fatherhood were great models of coaches. My father was an active dad. He was a present dad. But I also started to see what were some of the pop culture figures that helped me prepare, air quotes, prepare for fatherhood. So there was Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There was Heathcliff Huxtable from The Cosby Show. And there were other dads. And that started to frame how I wanted to be like the cool and present and hip, but also caring and nurturing, fair but firm father. All of that went out the window when I didn't have him. And sitting inside of a hospital holding my son, who was probably 15 minutes old, there were just tons of questions that just started to generate. And the first question wasn't, how can I get my kid to Harvard? Like, it wasn't that. It was, how do I raise a Black boy? Like, how in the hell do I figure this out? And I started to somewhat work backwards, right? Backwards design. I have this boy now. Instead of looking forward, I got to figure out what the pathways are backwards. And what I started to recognize is that there are so many systems and structures in place to support women, and there are none to support men. I looked at all of the classes that my wife had back to back to back every weekend, every weekday, and it was breathing techniques. It was how to deal with this in the hospital, what you should take. And I got pissed off because there was nothing out there for me. And for the 48,766 classes for women, there was one for men. And if you couldn't make it, you had to wait till the next year. And I started to ask myself, is the narrative of why dads aren't involved in kids' life preemptive by way of them not seeing themselves a part of this community at the forefront? And so if they don't see themselves, we get what Dan experienced, in that I start to put this pressure and blame on myself. But you can't win a game if you don't know the game that you're playing, but you got equipment. And so what I started to identify was there are systems in place that make fathers second-class citizens, right? We're the butt of every joke in sitcoms, right? The way that we are looked upon in the community with our kids is almost as if we are being pacified. Oh, look at you with your kid. Like yeah, duh. But then there was this other piece too of, as a natural educator, I became a problem solver. And with the birth of my son, I said to myself, hey, I need to speak things into the existence, into the environment, right? The universe will figure out a way for me to figure this all out. Because once a child is born, all of the attention goes to the mother and the child. You're not a second-class citizen, you're not a third-class citizen, you're not even a citizen, you're a provider, right? But I refused to hold on to that narrative because I said, I want to be an active father. I will be seen. You will know me. I will be at my child's schools if there are some shenanigans that take place, so don't be surprised. All of these different aspects of how fathers can essentially be almost written out of the story, I started to write myself in with bold black letters, no pun intended. And so from there, what that did for me was help me to see that my wife was a part of this new moms group. And so I said, if you were part of a new moms group, you got dads that are trying to figure this shit out too. So me being a natural educator, I said, okay, let me look at the curriculum that you have, wife, right? Let me pull out some of the aspects of framing, right? This is specific to women, this is specific to mothers. So then I developed a 6-week curriculum just by way of how can I support dads? And what I also started to do was loop in voices to help share this experience. My father-in-law is a pediatrician. So I said, you know what? I want to have a session where fathers could come with their newborns and ask questions that they may not feel comfortable asking to a pediatrician. They may not want to ask in front of their wife. They may not want to ask, period. But here we are inside of a high school gym with the basketball on the other side. Ask my father-in-law. We also talked about getting off of work and then being back on work. You get off at 5, your second job comes to play. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like? We also talked about reigniting empathy or intimacy, right? We also talked about you come home after serving 8 hours at the job and you see 46,000 Amazon packages in front of your door. Frustration could build, right? Because we as men don't know all of the work that goes into taking care of a child from when you leave the house to go to work and when you come back home, right? We just think that, you know, our wives are watching The View when the kids are asleep. Like, I had to learn some of these fails, right? Because that's what they were, because I had never been shaped by any past experience to understand that a child in a mom's body is not just 9 months. Right? They will be poked and prodded months after that, and their bodies may never even get back to the capacity at what it once was when you met them. So imagine your body never being the same again. So these were some of the things that I had to learn. I also implemented a whole workout regimen for dads too, where they had to bring their children in the car seat, and we did everything from high intensity, high impact workouts where dads had to do squats with the kids in the stroller, in the car seats. We did different circuits so the kids could get used to seeing different types of dads. Like this was all just kind of made up in my head, but it was all intentional, right? Because I started to ask questions to these dads about what they wanted. And when you create a space that's safe, where fathers can be brave and fathers can make mistakes, then what you end up getting are all of this insider information of how you can create fathering communities. But ultimately, what we ended up doing was every Saturday when we had these engagements, it would be a 2-hour commitment where you would have to take your child with you for 2 hours to give your wife or your spouse 2 hours to themselves. And we would meet at breweries, we would meet at coffee shops, we would meet at different places. And that was intentional because I would always throw in there something that we had to figure out as fathers. So the problem solved. So one time a father didn't have diapers for his child. What do you do? What do you do? And we problem solved. Another time I went into a coffee shop that didn't have a changing table in the men's room. That was on purpose. So fathers, what do you do? And what ended up happening was just this amazing view into how one of the fathers stood by the door while the other father went into the women's bathroom, changed the child, came out, and there was community and partnership. And all I was trying to share with the fathers is just ask for help. Just ask, who's going to say no to you trying to change your daughter's diaper? Like, who's going to say no? But ultimately, as you speak some of these things into existence, what I started to recognize is, as a Black dad, there were different experiences that I had to encounter that was not the case for the majority of the dads in my cohort, in my community that I created. And so that's when I started speaking into the universe, like, listen, 80% of what we all experience as dad is the same. But there's 20% of it that's different per father, right? Whether you are an immigrant, whether your dad is in the armed forces, like there's something about our journey that is different. And having the identity of being a proud Black man and a proud Black father, there are certain aspects at which I needed to seek out insight and intel from other fathers. The universe brought the Don and Harris together. And over breakfast one afternoon, we were just talking about some of the things that we were experiencing that were very similar. And the Dad Genes podcast birthed itself, right? And it's like, how can you have 3 dads from 3 different locations with 3 different experiences, born in 3 different eras, that have similar experiences, right? Like, how is that? And what we began to realize is that there are other dads that are probably experiencing the same thing. So the Dad Genes podcast came about, and it just so happened to make sense that each one of us represented a different letter in DMV. The Don being from DC, Harris being from Maryland, and me being from Virginia. We had co-parenting, homeschooling parent, myself raising biracial interfaith children. So we all had different perspectives, and just the conversation started to develop. And, you know, to have Apple recognize us as being one of the most listened to podcasts within our first week of launch, you know, that said a lot just about how important it was to have a platform where Black dads could be vulnerable, Black dads could be brave, Black dads could be fun. Like we're all quirky. Like it's so fun as dads when we get together. And guess what, folks? We don't always talk about grills and lawnmowers. Like some of us like planting flowers, right? Like some of us like doing things that may not be the norm of what fathers often discuss, but these are some of the things that came about with the Dad Genes podcast. And so, ultimately, I don't want to hold up too much more space. But again, it all came out of that moment where you hold your child for the first time and you say to yourself, so what's next? And either you sit there, you figure it out, or you let someone else who wrote a book about their child guide how you are going to be raising your child. Doesn't always work out that way. So just listen to your passions, ask for help, and know that it is okay to be the cool, quirky, corny dad, as long as you pour into that child, because it's the best thing that you've ever done to date. So.
Here's to that, man. Yes. And as somebody whose daughter is now immune to dad jokes because mine are so terrible, I can attest that, the quirky side will eventually mellow out to normalcy for our kids in some respects. So keep it up. Yeah. I truly appreciate that. And having been a guest on the Dad Genes podcast, yeah, you all get real pretty quick. There's not a lot of platitudes going on there. So I appreciate the work you've done.
Thank you.
Chris is no stranger to podcasts, and as the co-founder of Fathering Together, I would love to get your take on the early days of the Facebook community we were building and what it took to grow into now one of the largest spaces virtually for dads to gather on Facebook. We're right around 127,000 dads. I'm just curious, what it was like for you to be a co-founder, putting up with me in some respects, but really just hammering out the details of what we were to become. And then I've got some general questions for all of you, but yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. For us, the community itself was born out of a need for me. I had been blogging for many, many years, and I found that I had hit a wall and wanted to truly talk to more dads at that time with daughters, because the original community started as a Dads with Daughters Facebook group. And the reason that I did it was I wanted to talk to other dads with daughters to see how they were doing it. I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to bring people together to have that community that I didn't feel like I was getting by just writing every day on my blog or writing a couple times a week on my blog. And as we really organically grew it, and it really was organic. I mean, I was at a conference, a dad conference, the Dad 2.0 conference, and Facebook was there, and they were talking about the power of community and the power of groups. And I started doing some research and looking at the importance of community for fathers. And I thought of my own experience and knowing that as I got older, I found that I may not have been as open to building more friendships, talking and being open to other dads about what the heck I was going through. And so at that conference, I said, heck with this. I'm going to actually just pull off the Band-Aid, and we're going to invite as many people that I know that have daughters into a community and just start having communication and having opportunities to start talking with one another. So organically, that grew for about, I'm going to say that started in 2017. So it was about a year. Brian came on really early. I guess Brian had 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters, very different ages, but we've known each other for quite a few years, working at that time in higher education. And we started both just kind of snowball sampling, getting as many people as we could, inviting as many people, and then having other people inviting other people. And it grew organically to about 10,000, just shy of 10,000 members. And we got very lucky. I'm going to say that most groups don't get lucky like this, in the sense that Facebook emailed us and said, we want to make a commercial about your group. And yes, we were lucky. And it was a part of the More Together campaign that they did to really boost Facebook groups and Facebook communities. And when that launched, we jumped from 10,000, and basically on a daily basis, we were getting anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 new members and more. And very quickly, Brian and I realized we needed a team. We needed a team so that we could truly keep the community the way it was and keep it a safe place for people. And also hold true to the values that Brian and I had set. And I would say that was probably one of the most important things that we did from the very early ages was having a set vision for what the group is, what we wanted it to be, and staying true to that. And continuing to stay true to it today. And then bringing people on that agree with that are willing to build it with you and work with you to keep it on that same path. So as I said, between about May of 2018 to November of 2018, it was fast and furious. And we had to keep pivoting and moving and figuring out lots of different things to try to figure out how we were managing this influx of communication that was happening in the group. We made mistakes. I will be honest about that. Brian and I both made mistakes, and we learned from those mistakes. You know, we found very early on, I mean, at first we never moderated the group. We found that we had to moderate the group. We had to turn on moderation within the group, because otherwise people that were coming in the group to figure out if it was the right thing for them found that it wasn't, and were saying things that were not in the tenor of kind of the support that we wanted to see within the group. So that being said, I mean, we have always been open in the group to ebb and flow and to evolve. And I think that you have to do that with your community too, because your community is going to ebb and flow and evolve, especially as you get large. If you get large, you know, you may see, 100 people join and 100 people leave. And you just kind of have to be like, at first we watched that really closely. And now it's like, if it's not the right place, it's not the right place. And that's okay too. But in the end, our goal always was to help fathers to connect with one another, to build community with one another, because too often we isolate And too often we don't build that community amongst each other, and we aren't willing to be open with each other. And what we found in this community is, or in all of our communities, is that they're willing to share. Sometimes they overshare and say things that we were like, did he just say that? And that's good, but then we moderate too, because sometimes in the moderation, we'll let a post in, but we watch it really closely too, because we're like, this could be a powder keg, and we have to watch and make sure that it's staying on the straight and narrow, so that the support that the person truly needs is getting there, and the person's not getting denigrated for what they say.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. And especially speaking to just some of the logistical stuff that comes with communities, right? Like, I appreciate both Dan and Brian, the emotion that you poured in the birth stories, but there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining and kind of regulating and their businesses in some respect, right? Like, so I'm just curious, like take a side step a bit and just asking a question around the logistics of this all. Like, how do you keep it running, Dan? How did you keep it running, Brian, in those early days when it was, getting people to show up at a specific time and place, while also knowing that they had to manage sometimes very young children in diapers? So yeah, if either of you want to speak to just the logistical side of how to keep a group going, or your group.
I think mainly it wasn't, I think it was, we started as in-person events before we were a Facebook and group like that. And that's always a nightmare, because you always feel like a 13-year-old girl that's organising a birthday party and nobody's going to show. And then you've got to find the venue and, do the advertising. It was strange. I almost became a bit obsessive about it, because previously I'd kind of always felt like I was a bit lost or an outsider, and I didn't know where I fitted in. And it's like, well, now I know where I fitted in, because I'm building this for people like me. So yeah, I became rabid, and it became evenings and weekends for a lot of time. I ended up leaving my corporate job and doing it sort of semi full-time for a little while as well, while my then wife went back to work full-time. Yeah, it is hard, but again, like Chris said, it's about getting a team around you. You've got some amazing volunteers, and they give up their time and their energy and their ideas. I think we counted up, and it was about 11,000 hours of volunteer time. We're a small non-for-profit organisation. We don't have this big sum of cash to pay people. And also, I don't want to, because then people are in it for the wrong reasons. We're in it for the revolution, and people believe it, and then they become part of that community, and they, you see their confidence build, their skill sets build. They're taking ownership of stuff, and that, to see some of these guys, and they're from very different backgrounds and very different family circumstances as well. But it's that three-letter word, that DAD, that's bringing all these fellas together. And I think it becomes quite potent, because then they're opening up, they're hearing other people's stories and going, well, but you're the guy that lives in the big house with the fancy car and stuff like that. How can you struggle? And then, it becomes a really interesting level. So yeah, there are, lots of lessons to learn. I'm a little bit addicted to seeing how many ticket sales we've got on pretty much every event, but I know I've got to stop that, because we're going to launch another 6 locations by the end of the year. And I haven't got time for that. It's kind of, I'm going to build it, make it special. If you want to come. But I've given up the day of trying to call people out by spending 14 hours blamming Facebook groups, probably like yours. So apologies for that in the past,
Oh, good. Appreciated the shout outs that you gave in our group, I'm sure. How about you, Brian? What were some of the challenges and joys of getting yours off the ground?
Yeah, so it was, I give a lot of credit to the Don and Harris and sort of the preliminary work that we did to just learn more about what it takes to have a successful podcast. So there were articles that we engaged with, blogs that we read, YouTube videos that we watched. And we essentially went in with, I want to say it was like 3 to 5 episodes that we had already done before we actually launched, right? And we were just really getting our footing into understanding not only the process of a podcast, but understanding each other, right? Because we joined with an idea of the work, right? So it was intentional. But then what sort of morphed from that were relationships, right? And so that is why we sort of had that fluidity with our conversation and our engagement. You know, a lot of folks would listen to the podcast and be like, y'all sound like y'all have known each other for years. And it's like, well, we've known, but there is a level of trust that's here and we actually like each other. So that was definitely great, having that sort of preemptive guidance before we even got activated. And things happen for a reason. We were in the start of the pandemic, and this gave us additional value, right? This guided just more of our direction in the midst of the chaos that was known as the pandemic. And so we were committed to each other and to this podcast during that time where it was uncertain about what was going on outside of our homes. And we all took an active role. Like Don was great with the editing and some of the splicing and putting things together. You know, just some of the logistical pieces. Harris was on top of that with some of the booking of guests. And then, you know, me with the social media side, and learning some programs and figuring out how to get social media content out there. And we started to get a lot of traction, and it just started to really be exciting. But I tell you, sort of one of the things that really just made this worthwhile was having people that listened engage with us on social media and in person. You know, my mother-in-law, father-in-law, friends, professors. You know, we had listeners that were across the sea. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, who the heck wants to listen to me in Australia? Like, I can't. Now, mind you, it was one person that probably stopped it halfway through, but at least they stopped on us, right? Like, at least they listened. And so those were some of the things that really kept us going. What did get complicated and tough is just life stuff, right? Like the loss of a job, right? Trying to find a job. I had a daughter during this time, and you want to talk about not having time with one, try having 2 kids and seeing if you have time. With, you know, a wife that needed what she needed, me needing what I needed. And so all of that just played into, you know, how can we sustain this? Are we still being fulfilled in the way that we once started? What is the shifting tides in this fathering thing? You know, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? And what is it that Black dads really want, right? And how can we activate more of the Black fathers to seek sort of topics that would be a connection between listenership and just trying to figure out this thing called everybody and their mama got a podcast. And just because you got a microphone in your face doesn't mean that you are apt to be a good podcaster. I'm not saying that we were the best, but what I am saying is that when you listen to a podcast, like, for example, we enjoyed listening to the Pivot podcast, and it's former athletes, but they are polished. And when we listened to our first episodes, we're far away from that, right? So it was just being very critical with our product, really thinking about how can we tweak our product. And so, you know, it was a lot of growth, but it was also trying to figure out how to build a plane, land it, and let it take off all at the same time when we don't know nothing about planes. So you know, that was the reason why we were active with it. We were activated and we were challenged by it all within the same vein.
I like that you said product, right? Because in some respects, podcast is a product, a community is a product that you have to sell in a sense, but also get the buy-in from everyone, where a podcast can sometimes be very isolating because it's just the 3 of you in a room talking. It's the responses, right? And with the communities, as it's getting that buy-in from others. Like we did virtual dad-daughter dances during the pandemic in our Facebook group with a DJ going live in the space. And if we didn't have guys posting comments or photos of them and their kids dancing in their kitchens, it could have easily just been me dancing in my kitchen with some random guy playing in the DJ.
True. That's true. I would have been there.
Yeah.
I would have been there. But you know, the other thing I wanted to say too is what I learned is that we can't assume that everybody listens to podcasts. Right. Just like we can't assume that Facebook is the driver of social media when now folks have gone to TikTok and IG and so many other platforms. And so there were a number of dads, especially dads of color, that I would talk to about podcasts, and they'll be like, they would know what a podcast was, but it wasn't something that was so frequent, like it would be just checking your IG post, you know. And so that's when, you know, the brain trust of Dad Jeans got together and just said, look, how can we make our post a little bit more animated, right? Like making sure that we had a vocal component to our post, making sure that we had language that was accessible for individuals that may not be able to hear, but they could see it, right? And so just trying to figure out how do we shape shift in real time so that we can get folks on board with this platform called podcast.
That's a good point. Yeah, versatility and access is so critical on all these fronts.
Yeah.
With the time we have left, I'd love to shift to like the benefits side of this, right? Like you all were kind of talking about some of the benefits you saw in members, the gatherings and the camaraderie that was happening. But I'm just curious, as the founders and leaders of these spaces, you know, we can burn out pretty easily. It can be isolating being at the top of a pyramid, so to speak, or just in the background, making sure, like you were saying, Dan, all the tickets get sold or the venue is located and open on time. So I'm just curious, like, why don't we start with you, Chris? What did you put in place to bring some balance and some kind of mental health supports for you to make sure that you weren't burning out or disconnecting at times?
I think that for us, I mean, the biggest thing was having that team. I mean, we had to be able to step away at times. Brian and I both had to step away at times and be willing to allow for others to take a lead when we needed them to take a lead, or no, because at the very beginning, I think Brian and I were on in our groups probably, I don't even know how many hours a day. I mean, it was really crazy. But the reason for that was the fact that, I mean, we were working full-time in our own jobs. We were doing this really full-time. We were trying to be full-time dads. And at some point, we had to say, uncle. We had to say, we can't, this isn't good for our families, and it's not good for what we're showing our kids too. And Brian, you can tell your story about that because that I think that was a good story about your daughter and what she said to you. And I'll let him tell that after I'm done here. But basically, I think for us is really the fact that, I mean, for us, we had to have a team behind us to be able to have that mental health space, to be able to step away and to not feel like we had to be present all the time, and to know that it was okay, and to give ourselves the grace to say, it's okay. It's okay to not be there all the time. And I think as you build these type of communities, they start to build a personality of their own, and they become something of their own. And you have to let it do that, but at the same time, hopefully you've set up the building blocks so that it stays on the track that you've been pushing it toward, or you've been pushing it down as you've been building it along the way as well. But Brian, you should tell your story.
No, I don't want to because it's putting me on the spot. But yes, around right before I went full time, I was putting my daughter to bed. She was about 6-ish years old. I think actually I told this happened right before I went on the Dad Jeans podcast. I remember this because it was still fresh. But I was putting her to bed, and she knew I was running this fatherhood community. She knew like all the things I was doing. And it was, you know, still very new into the pandemic. And so even though we were all in the same house, physically around each other all the time, I kind of emotionally distanced myself in some respects because I was pouring myself into other spaces. And so when I put her to bed, she was like, Dad, I know you're running a group for dads to be better dads, but you're not being a good dad to me. And, having that come out of a 6-year-old's mouth with all the cute little like lispy, like mispronunciations and everything was not easy at all. But on the one hand, it speaks to the relationship we had, that she felt so comfortable and trusting that she could tell me something like that. But on the other side, it still really hurt. And by the grace of something, we got funding enough to, give me the space to go full time, to really pour into Fathering Together, to make it more of a thing. And that turned into a 1.5 years of a lot of research, a lot of building. Now, we could talk about this another time, but I'm doing other things. But yeah, I think out of the mouth of babes, there is some hard truths and some wake up calls for all of us. And I think it just reinforced for me, it's not an either or. You're either a breadwinner or a caregiver. It's a both and it's a constant balancing act between how much you can commit to either one of those identities on a given day with your kids, and to not forget that they're constantly keeping tabs on that balance for you, and we'll let you know that. So so that's my story, one of many of daggers into me from my kids. But Dan or Brian, how about you? How do you kind of find that balance or keep your mental health centered in the midst of everything you do?
I would say it was tough. It's not easy, because you have what pays the bills from 9 to 5, and then you realize that to do a podcast successfully, how many hours a day or week or weekend, do you or can you commit to it? It just so happened that our kids were great nappers. And so every, Saturday and Sunday between like noon and to 3, I would have that window of time, but that wouldn't necessarily be a window of time that I could spend with my wife, or that I could take a break, so it's never give and take, right? It's more just giving, and then demanding the take, right? And that is when we saw that having those podcasts that we created in the beginning that we had never used could start to be put into some of the missing weeks, to give us some of that time back, for us to be able to have a week of not focusing necessarily on turning around a podcast. And the other thing that we started to see too that was hard, especially for our mental health, is that the relationship between the podcast or the Dad Jeans crew was so transactional. It started to be, what do we need to do for the podcast? And we had to pull ourselves back together to maintain the strong friend relationship, and so you want to make sure that, this is your baby, right? And you want to go ahead and nurture this baby, but you also have to recognize when it doesn't become a baby and when it's no longer a baby, right? It's a thing. And, one of the best things, to your second point, Brian, is that the greatest thing that came from this, besides the growth as a father, the fathers that have, provided clothing and strollers and like other things just by way of just engaging with our podcast, like, the community is great. My voice will be able to live in history and be an archive for my children to be able to hear more about what my experience was as a father when they were born. Not a lot of us can say that about our dads, right? Not a lot of us can say that about our dads. And so knowing that at some point, whether they are 15 or 50, to know that they could find this dad gene somewhere and hear my voice and hear my fear and hear how much I love them and also hear how much I love their mother, will be the journal. It's a living diary. It's a living journal. And if there is nothing else I can take from this, it's the fact that I would love to be able to hear my dad's voice right now. And my kids will be able to have the access to hear how corny my jokes were, what I was afraid of, the difference of how I showed up for my daughter versus my son, but also hearing that this shit ain't easy, but I'm committed to it. So that is the best thing that came from this, and knowing that my kids have a living just log of how corny their dad was. I'm cool with that.
Can I just say that's really, really beautiful. I'd never considered it like that. And you're absolutely right. I would have loved to listen to more of my dad's stories. Just
Mhm.
didn't have the opportunity. We never didn't need to. Blah, 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 blah. And now I can't. I would give anything. So yeah, that's really, really beautiful. And then Brian, that story that you told about your daughter, I can completely relate.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people want to talk to me about Dad Lassalle, which is amazing. I've got a bit of a reputation or whatever. And it's actually right. I need to be dad, not Dad Lassalle. Two very different people, two very different roles. You know, I started it so I'd have something to do with my own son on the Saturday. But then during the events, everybody else would want to talk to me, or I'd see a dad that was struggling or lonely and I'd want to focus. And it's actually my son's there going, oh, can we just play? And like, no, in a minute. So it's almost, it went the other way. And in regard to the burnout thing, I still struggle with it. I sort of during lockdown, I had two previous co-directors that I had brought on board, and they took more of a management role while I stepped out because I had to go and find some other paid work. And we were really good friends at the time, and it ended really badly. You know, so I had given them my baby to look after, and they had very different views on how to raise a child. So we ended up in a very toxic situation where they had to go. It was financial mismanagement. And it was, I remember there was a time I was in the shower. I wasn't sleeping because of the stress. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I sort of burst into tears. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I've kind of, everything's gone. I can't do events because I can't lockdown. I can't do that. But then I knew that the kind of, no matter how bad I felt, there was a dad in a worse situation. And by us doing the events, it helped them. So it was kind of not, you know, we have a saying over here, like pull up your big girl pants and just get on with it. And so I almost had to, after building it for 3.5 years, it went back to day one. I thought, okay, how do I do this? I then took on a new full-time job. I became obsessive. My marriage broke down. But the benefits far outweigh the negatives. It is all consuming. I don't tend to switch off quite a lot. You know, I can still struggle with balance. But it's having the Dad Lassalle community is actually saved. You know, when my marriage broke down, I was in a really dark place. You know, I wasn't seeing my own child, yet I was running this dad's organization. So, you know, there's almost a bitter irony that I would spend my time at events and seeing other dads play with their kids. And then I just sort of put my hand up and I said, boys, I can't do it. And they're like, fine, don't worry, we got you covered, completely understand. It was just a bit too raw. So that I think those benefits far outweigh any kind of negative. And I'm blessed to have a job now that sort of pays the bills, but I am so passionate about. And I've never felt, I'm nearly 50 years old, to find this level of, you know, career. So I'm having this, and we are going for the global domination because there are so many other men that are struggling, that are not speaking up, that could just fancy, you know, Saturday, we don't have to go down the park on our own. We don't have to go to soft play run. We've got a community, and that's a beautiful thing.
One thing I wanted to say in what you said, Dan, I mean, you were talking a little bit about bringing people on and that it went bad. It went poorly. And one of the things that I would say there is for anyone that is thinking of starting a podcast with other people, starting a community with other people, doing something with other people, is look at it like a business and come up with a contract and live by that contract and set it up ahead of time, because too often it can go poorly. And if you don't set it up ahead of time, it's going to blow up. And, you know, especially if money is a part of it, And especially if there's some type of intellectual property or other type of ownership that happens with whatever that property or whatever that piece of knowledge or piece of or that community, whatever it is, you need to set it up ahead of time. You need to have the hard question. You need to have the hard conversations first before you get too far in, and then things blow up.
That to me was it was a hard lesson to learn, because they were very close friends. And now I don't talk to them, you know, and that stung a lot, because everything we're doing, our weekends and evenings were spent chatting. It became almost obsessive, but it was really nice to have this common ground, because we're all working, I assumed, for this one mountain to climb. But yeah, I think the idea of almost having statement of works and stuff, but then it formalizes it. It almost takes the fun out of it, you know. And is it a business, or is it a community that we do it because we love? And I think there's finding that middle ground. So now I'm fortunate for, you know, a sort of brand new team that have been with me for the sort of last couple of years. They're excellent, absolutely a joy to work with and supportive. And I'm much more understanding that, you know, they've got so many other roles in their life as well, so they can't maybe commit as much as I can. But if it's 2 hours of your time, 2 hours of your time, 2 hours of your time, 2 hours of, that's a working day. Together we can build something. Everybody's got a part to play.
I don't want to end this conversation, but we do need to let people get back to their day. We have things to get back to in our days. And as we all talked about, fatherhood is just one aspect of our identities, right? It's a huge outsized role for many of us in our daily lives now, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. So we'll have to wrap this panel now, but there are plenty of opportunities every Friday. There will be more panels, more conversations focused on mental health, raising kids, advocacy work that we can be doing as fathers. But we'll also be doing some live conversations throughout the summer. Unfortunately, they're in the evenings. So for Dan and the UK friends, we'll have to find some morning sessions that'll work down the road. But again, there's never a fatherhood community that is out of reach. And so if you are struggling to find a community, or you have a small one that you want to grow and get some support in building, please reach out to us at Fathering Together. Happy to connect you with Dan, with Brian, with anyone in our network, because we are a network of networks, and we have dads all over the globe trying to do better for themselves, their families, their children, everybody. So thank you.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah,
Just say
yeah.
Congratulations, seriously, for you and Chris and the team. The amount of work that you guys have put in to put these events on is astronomical, right? You make it look so seamless, right? But I know underneath, because I've seen the bloody emails, you know, and the way that you are so open and giving and connecting these organizations. And I think that you're exactly the right people to start bringing these organizations together, because listening to you, listening to Chris, Brian, some of the stuff you're saying is that you live several thousand miles away, but I'm having exactly the same thoughts, exactly the same challenge. So if we bring it together, we've got a dad's army, right? And that's where change happens. So I salute you, my general.
Well, let's go less violent and more peacekeeping, as we want to build a safe community for our children. But hey, you know, it does take an army. It takes a small group to build a larger movement. And I welcome you all who are listening to be a part of our Sea Change, whether you're a dad wanting to be a dad, or you have a dad who could use some additional support. Please reach out, info@fatheringtogether.org. Our goal is to really help you become emotionally courageous, connected, and committed to those families that you are connected to. So we'll see you next Friday, and thank you all very much for listening. Bye now.